Please hold. Welcome back to One Decision. We're here live at the Warsaw Security Forum. I'm Christina Ruffini with my co-host Sir Richard Dearlove, and our guest this afternoon is Priti Patel. She's the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the UK, but she's had a lot of jobs, a lot of experience, and is one of the people to talk to here. So thank you for taking the time.
It's a pleasure to be here, it really is. Thank you for inviting me.
What is your first impression? Because we were all just kind of discussing this conference and the fact that there are many of these now, and you were saying maybe there might be too many because it's getting fractured.
So I think, look, it's a privilege to be here, it really is. And let's not forget, we are here in Warsaw. Poland on the front line, eastern flank, Russia, Ukraine, a country that has been there from the outset. And I say this as a Brit, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I was on the phone to my counterparts in Poland and the eastern flanks, and actually I came here literally at the end of that February.
I was here the next day. I spent 6 weeks
on the border.
Yeah.
Right, on the border.
I think we were all at Medica.
So I genuinely think, having listened to President Zelensky this morning in his opening remarks and address, he made a really important point, which is we must all be united. We must all work together, because of course what's Putin doing? He's trying to divide us, isn't he? Trying to divide Europe, trying to divide the response, which basically I think is a powerful message to us all. Work together, step up. That's the joy of being here, through the conversations, discussions and the bilaterals I'm having, but also the bilaterals everyone else is having, right? And I think that's really important. And just one other point on this, I've just met our representative from NATO. I take great heart at this moment in time to the way NATO now feels more united, more stronger, dare I say, reinforced. Yes, because of America and President Trump, but actually what that means for all of us here and this part of Europe in that collective response to Russia.
Well, I think the thing that's most extraordinary now, if you look at Putin's policies, is that the net result is the strengthening and the unification of NATO.
Yeah.
And I mean, these probes, the recent incidents across the Polish border, Estonian airspace, I mean, what do? They're, getting NATO's act together, don't you agree?
So I do, and let's not forget, we're sitting here right now in Warsaw. I think it was 2 weeks ago, 19 drones flew into Poland, and after that we've seen, it's been a sequence, it's been sequential range of activities that have taken place. Estonia, Romania, Denmark. I mean, Denmark
was an outlier, it was a surprise to me.
Completely,
yeah.
And it was, I will say this because I'm pretty direct about most things in life. How dare they? How dare Russia do that to our friends, allies, NATO partners? And that's why I think this is such a pivotal moment. And I do take heart from the fact that NATO is, I don't want to say stepping up, I think it's beyond stepping up. We're fighting for our sovereignty, our own rule of law effectively, our institutions, our freedoms and value. I think the last time Europe was confronted with such a challenge, was decades ago. But that was a fight for freedom, and it was a fight against tyranny. And I genuinely believe we're at that moment. We have been at that moment since Russia invaded Ukraine. But this, for us now, is that moment of recognition that we're all at risk. And actually, Russia is affecting all of us right now. And I say this as a Brit, Russia affected UK many years ago. Salisbury poisonings, Novichok, spies at the heart of, our systems, all sorts of things. The cyber attacks, you name it. We've been calling this out for a hell of a long time now.
We are in a state of grey warfare, effectively.
Of course it is. I think it's more than that.
But I mean, you feel it here in Poland, but I think, if you're in the UK, we have to educate our own population to make them realise how serious the situation is. I mean, it's improving. I mean, people are more aware than they were, but we've still got a lot of work to do.
So, Richard, what I'd say to you, I guess I come with this with the veneer, I'm kind of like, I was in government, so I've been there and seen the most appalling and atrocious, undermining of our own systems, basically, our culture, our values, our norms. We became, dare I say it, an environment that was permissible, and we've taken action against that. We have expelled their spies, individuals, taken action, you name it, we've been there, seen it, got the t-shirt. What I would say on this, though, is that Britain has a leadership role and a position to effectively not just do more domestically. Yes, of course, that's something we can talk about in a minute or two, but also how we share our learnings with our friends and allies and with NATO as well as NATO countries to say, we've got a bit of a playbook on this. This is basically what you need to be forewarned on. This is basically how we've tackled this. You guys need to accelerate this urgently right now. And by the way, it also applies to China. It applies to China, which is also grey zone activity, but directly on things such as technology and the cyberspace and all the things that they're out competing us on.
We have a leadership role in Europe. I mean, this is one of the ironies post-Brexit, that
exactly.
Europe's decided, or discovered really, that they can't do without the UK's leadership role.
Quite.
When it comes to intelligence security, let's say defence policy, our sort of strategic conceptions of Europe, we are absolutely key central player. But I mean, I hope now that message at this sort of event is understood by the other European players.
So I think in good news, I've been doing the shadow portfolio for just under a year, since last November, and one of the things that was quite heartening, I meet with diplomats, ambassadors constantly, various representatives from various institutions. That's the nature of the role. The Europeans have been there from the outset, and they have all recognised, they're very open in the discussions with me actually, that is because of Brexit. I think they want to say that a bit quietly, but now they're very open about it. Because of Brexit, we have a different type of dialogue and engagement and respectability because of the leadership that we do play. Ukraine was pivotal to this. Let's be very open and honest about that. What happened, back when this conflict started, we were preparing for, I was in government at the time, so I can, absolutely recall what it was like. And it was that leadership that Conservatives in government gave across Europe and around the world. We were beating at the door of the Americans as well as NATO allies. Look at what we did with establishment of the JEF training, Operation Interflex with Estonia. We lent in. And of course, you can't forget that. And since then, obviously, even with wearing back in the day my Five Eyes hat as well, all our national intelligence and security platforms, we were there, and we are still there, and we've got to continuously be there. And this is more than holding hands. This is actually paving the way. In some instances, we've got the paving stones, and we're sort of putting them down. Depending upon what is the line of attack today, what new technologies are we seeing being used against Ukraine, used against us, and we're showing a leadership role there.
Tide is turning in Ukraine's favour. I mean, in the last few weeks, I've really felt maybe there's the beginning of a strategic shift, and that the atmosphere is different, even, as it were, the morale in Ukraine is different, because they've been through, for obvious reasons we understand, a tough passage.
So I sense change with a degree of hope. Now, I don't mean that in an overtly optimistic way. I mean that in a directional way, that the direction of travel has changed. And a couple of things to point to is...
The direction of the rhetoric out of the White House was
incredibly
significant.
That's the big point, right? So, and I'm going to say all credit to the President and for the way in which, I think he's probably been on a journey here as well, understanding more.
But who do you think has brought him on that journey? I watch the people around him, especially in a foreign leadership space. And my go-to thought was, it's Macron, it's Starmer, it's these regulars. And then someone else was telling me, look to Finland, look to the Finnish president who golfs. He's got all new people around him. Was it just, the number of people? Was it what's happening on the ground that finally convinced him? Do you think it was a factor of all of the above? Or?
So I think it's a combination of all of it, to be very honest. And I think, we should just recognise that. We're quite close to it because of, I've had the involvement in Ukraine over my time in government, and obviously we speak to various representatives, counterparts, diplomats. Finland have been incredible. They're a great ally, an amazing country, I have to say. And
good add to NATO. Good add to NATO.
And expansion of NATO has happened in recent years, but the Finns, I actually had some good dialogue with them. In the spring of this year, when certain representatives came to visit London, look at the robust action that they took, against the Russians directly in the waters, all this kind of stuff. Hats off to them. But the macro point here is that coming back to the White House and the President, is that collectively everyone's been able to speak very specifically about what they've seen, how their countries have been violated, how sovereignty has been undermined, how even our strong defences have, shown that actually, yeah, we picked up all this stuff and that's great, but this is where the vulnerabilities are. And by the way, that's vulnerabilities for the United States. This is where we have to do more together. We're going to do much more on the defence collaborations. We've had those conversations as well. So I think it is the real combined, how to put this, it's the experience, the lived experience as to what's going on. And that has absolutely, I think, helped to change the understanding.
Melania too.
I think that is also, because she, say what you will about the administration but she's pretty consistent when it comes to children's issues, when it comes to humanitarian issues, and I know this has been a big issue for her because Trump has said it, right? He said, she's talked to me about this issue.
All credit to her, 100%. Honestly, and the human element. So, I mean, the children aspect, 20,000 kidnapped children, just the sheer abhorrence of that. The Yale report came out last week, I think it was, or 10 days ago. I mean, going through that, no one can sit back and basically, say, oh my God, you can't be moved by that. We can't ignore that. You've got to do more. I appreciate that's one pillar of all of this alongside the harder security edge. But that's where you can move the needle. And this is really important on the human element, First Lady to First Lady. I think it's so important and so significant. So we need to keep pushing all of this. We really do. I think it's just so important. And I'll just, if I may just share something with you. We have our political conventions, party conferences in the United Kingdom.
My co-host can't be here because she's covering them.
There you go. So I intend to be speaking about Ukraine at my conference next week, and we'll be standing very proudly, making the case, but in solidarity. Look at what my country did. I was Home Secretary at the time. People were giving me a hell of a hard time when I was Home Secretary. But, in terms of bringing people from Ukraine to our country. And obviously Poland. I was working with my Polish counterparts on the borders because of what was happening. And it was women and children who were at the forefront of all our concerns. Safeguarding. I cannot begin to describe to you what we went through around safeguarding both women and children to stop dreadful things from happening to them. That's a human aspect that I think sometimes gets forgotten. And all credit to everybody now. They've really understood that in its entirety and how we have to really support, not just those individuals in our own countries, obviously think about them going home in due course, but that is the human aspect of this entire conflict that we must all be very alive to.
In my little Cornish village, a Ukrainian family turned up just after the invasion, and I mean it was incredible that you were able to sort of support them and help them.
Well, in my own
and everybody rallied round. I mean, it was incredible.
Well, we see this everywhere across the country now. We really do, and that's the unity. And don't forget. I think this is really important. It's a generational thing. The last time war in Europe happened under such abhorrent, appalling circumstances. The history is well known, and at the same time, people were fleeing for their lives. Europe has opened its arms and its hearts. Our country has done the same as well. That to all of us should be a massive reminder of the sort of fragility around security, defence, our freedoms, what we're all fighting for. And I think more than ever in an unstable world, this is basically, that's the glue that is going to bind us together and make sure that we all work together to challenge authoritarianism, to stand up and fight tyranny, and to stand strong when it comes to our values. That's what we're talking about.
Speaking of values, why do you think Europe was so ready to welcome Ukrainians fleeing war and has had a much different reaction to migrants from other parts of the world, other countries coming into Europe? Because that was one of the, I was covering the refugee issue as well, and there was a lot of pushback from Syrian communities, from North African communities, saying the reason you're welcoming these people is because they look like you. We have children who are at war too. Is it that? Why do you think that is? Let me just ask.
So I can say this. I've held that portfolio. So before my time, even before I became Home Secretary, the United Kingdom had a very clear policy, by the way, under a Conservative government, on Syrian refugees and resettlement. So for us, that argument doesn't wash. Our country stood up.
Germans took quite a lot as well. Yeah.
So Germany did. But also on Syria, let's not forget, as well as the people's side, the conflict side, Britain really did stand so firm on Syria, on chemical weapons, the debates in Parliament, the actions that we wanted to take, resolutions, I'm afraid, that did not materialise into direct actions, and we all look back now, the hand-wringing that took place, only prolonged the conflict, and that's a terrible, terrible,
the red
terrible
line with
thing.
Obama, with the chemical weapons.
Completely.
We were in a control room ready for him to make the speech, and he didn't make it.
No, that was a catastrophic mistake.
So it was catastrophic, right?
Yeah, no, it was
so absolutely awful, which, guess what, prolonged the conflict. I think we've got, Syria's another subject now, even when we look at the regime that we've got there right now and how governments are interacting with them. So let's be very honest, countries did step up, and we've all taken responsibility for some of the consequences of that, which have led to a much more conflated debate around migration. The other thing to say now, though, and Richard, you might have some views on this, you might want to come in. I always distinguish between legal migration, so the routes that are genuine and set up through government structures, versus illegal migration. Illegal migration is completely the biggest challenge that we're facing domestically. Other countries are as well.
U.S. as well. It's a huge issue, of course.
Yeah,
But if you look at, the people we brought in from Hong Kong.
Yeah, BNAs,
I mean,
of
that's
course.
entirely legal, a dynamic
It was an
addition to the...
economic route.
Yeah, and an entirely dynamic addition to the economy.
Sure.
I mean, actually, similarly with the Ukrainians who came in, a lot of them have, made a huge contribution. I mean, it's economic migrants who come in illegally, who are not refugees from warfare, who are caught.
And they bust the rules, right? So they don't work with our rules. This is the whole thing. I found myself I've just shared this with you last week, explaining to someone the Hong Kong BNO route. So BNO, British Nationals Overseas, right?
Okay, thank you for that, because American here.
Really
Work with
quite
me. Work
important.
with me.
Guess what? Britain and Hong Kong, we had a long-standing relationship.
It was a thing.
Okay?
It was a thing.
So, we are wedded, and the National Security Act, brought in by China, an authoritarian axis state, etc. And the whole point about the economic route is that the BNOs that came to the United Kingdom, they were not entitled to claim any welfare or any benefits. These are people that sold their assets and then came to the UK and invested. They bought homes, they, education, you name it. They're all part of the system. They've been integrated.
I negotiated part of the security deal with the Ministry of State Security on Hong Kong, which was the agreement that the Chinese bust completely.
Which now has been virtually torn up, right? And that's the reason why, obviously, I know we've been speaking about Russia, Ukraine, that's why China, we're absolutely crystal clear about China. That law needs to be completely torn up, that national security, the draconian national security law, what it's doing to people, the country, erosion of freedoms, etc. And then, of course, you've got individuals such as Jimmy Lai, and this awful trial and imprisonment, and then we want to see an end to all of that. That is not, that's not the Hong Kong we left behind.
We're running a little short on time, and I do want to ask you, there are reports out this morning of this new proposed peace plan for Gaza and Israel coming out of Steve Witkoff, the U.S. negotiator and envoy, has a lot of points, the things you would expect, and there's some more interesting elements. One of them, there's going to be a release of hostages, there's going to be amnesty for Hamas leaders who agree to lay down their arms, or safe passage for those who want to just not, I guess. But the thing that we want to talk to you about is there's this clause that says Gaza will be administered by a temporary transitional government of Palestinian technocrats who will be responsible for providing day-to-day services for the people of the Strip. The committee will be supervised by an international body consulting with Arab and European partners, and it will establish a framework for funding the redevelopment of Gaza until the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. That's the first time we've seen the PLA mentioned in a U.S. proposal. How significant is that? What's your take on the whole thing, and do you think Israel's going to accept it?
Well, I can't speak for Israel and whether they're going to accept anything at all right now. I mean, look, something has to shift in terms of governance and proposals. proposal has to be put on the table, particularly after last week and all this recognition of Palestine that was taking place without proposals and without getting rid of Hamas and without the PA being reformed. And let me just say this.
And I posed that question to some of those leaders, and I said, this is not a viable solution.
Yeah,
there is not a viable.
Not.
And they, the argument was it's symbolic. You have to give them something. You have to get them to the table.
Yeah, I'm very critical. So I am very critical. Okay, so I am one of the largest critics of recognition. I personally, I think the British government has just fallen into just a complete trap on this, and it's political. It's political pressure, right? So the politics in the UK, we don't need to talk about it right now.
Issue,
it's party political. So Labour backbench MPs are determining British foreign policy. That's an outrage. This approach is not in the interest of my country at all, and it serves no purpose because, quite frankly, it sucks us into a terrible situation. And by the way, the British government, the current Labour British government, have been giving money to the Palestinian Authority. They signed an MOU earlier on in the year without any conditions, by the way. They claimed there were conditions that were about reforming the PA, etc. But with conditions, you've got to have some proper conditionality and some proper steps around this. There's no substance. On this, the fundamental question will now be, so what are the checks and balances? Where's the conditionality? Who's putting the money in? I'm going to also say this, where is the region? Where is the actual region? It's been a consistent issue. Why are we why should we put money into this? Why should we be funding this? There are too many unanswered, open-ended questions here. And as much as America is doing the starter for 10 or the straw man, however you want to describe this, it's fine up to a certain point, but is it realistic? And who are the people, who are the operatives that are going to be delivering this? Because if it's the same Palestinian people that were responsible for the failed state that let Hamas in and that probably took away a lot of the money as well and let people starve and all that kind of stuff, I'm afraid that's not viable. This has to be credible, and you need people that, quite frankly, don't have a vested interest, that are, if they're technocrats, how technocratic are they? Can they build institutions? Can they build systems? Can they keep the lights on? Can they give flowing water and bring food in? Because those are the fundamental starting blocks that are absolutely needed.
Tony Blair is head of the provisional administration.
Well, the one thing I would just say on this is that he will have to go through some serious auditing and vetting. And I say that on the basis that, my country even failed to do some serious auditing and vetting of someone that they then appointed to become our ambassador to the United States. So, we have to be careful about this.
I think we agree on that one.
We have to be super careful. We really do. This is going to be a make or break moment.
But if the Egyptians, the Saudis and the Jordanians step up to the plate rather than watch from the sidelines, it might be a...
Can we add a few more? Can we add some other countries to that as well?
All right, which ones?
Saudi.
Well, Saudi, it said Saudi.
Yeah. The GCC at large
the
as well.
GCC, yeah. I mean, but the key players would be Saudi and Egypt. Yeah. Those two, really, if it's going to work.
Well, the Americans will put the money in, no doubt, to enable that.
Yeah.
But it has to come from them. And I don't think this can just be sort of a Western model that is being imposed. And I mean that in the best possible way. This is the Middle East. There has to be some ownership there as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that's crucial. It's in everybody's interest. And if we want peace and stability and no more terrorism, no more organic terrorism as well, which I think the Egyptians, the Saudis, the GCC will be super, super conscientious of as well.
I'm already hearing from those leaders.
Yeah. Really, they're waiting for the Israelis to rub out Hamas, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's how it seems, right?
But the thing is, they have the same, political objective, but they, because of the fate of the Palestinians, they can't stand up and say.
And they can't say it publicly.
They can't say.
No, we understand that.
It's a really ironical. It's a tragic situation.
And it is tragic because every single day, people are suffering. And that is the most intolerable aspect of all of this and the conflict. And that's why, let's go back to the basics. If an institution can be created that can feed people, give them water, put roofs over their head and give them electricity, that's got to be the first premise to all of this. That is, that would be a positive, welcome step forward.
We have to let you go. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been a pleasure.
And I hope you have a great time in Warsaw.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Stand by for just a sec.